When we see headlines about missile strikes and regional instability, it's easy to get caught up in the immediate drama, or to reduce it to a simple good versus evil narrative. But what if I told you that this war, or rather the conditions that made it possible, have been decades in the making, shaped by a series of choices, missteps, and ideological crusades by Western powers? This isn't about assigning blame in a simplistic way. It's about understanding the intricate web of history, power, and ideology that has brought us to this point. The Israel-Iran conflict didn't just appear overnight. It's the culmination of nearly 25 years of relentless transformation across West Asia, and to truly grasp it, we need to go back in time. For much of the 20th century, the Middle East, despite its internal conflicts, operated within a surprisingly predictable framework. Think of it as a delicate but functioning balance, largely dictated by the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union, as superpowers, patronized local regimes, and this patronage, however imperfect, maintained a certain stability. There was a clear ideological battle: socialism versus the hypothetical free world. But then the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union dissolved, and with it, the old rules of the game vanished. Suddenly, for the next 25 years, the United States stood largely uncontested in the region. This created a massive power vacuum. The old ideological struggle disappeared, leaving fertile ground for new forces to emerge and new ambitions to take root. Washington, in its newfound unipolar moment, tried to impose its vision of Western liberal democracy as a universal truth. They believed that market economics, elections, and civil society were the answers to the region's problems. But things are rarely that simple. As this Western liberal agenda was pushed, two other powerful trends simultaneously emerged: political Islam, ranging from reformist to radical, and the reassertion of authoritarian secular regimes, which positioned themselves as bulwarks against chaos. Here's the paradox. While ideologically opposed to the West, some forms of Islamism, in their resistance to autocracy, actually align more closely with the liberal ideal of pushing back against authoritarianism. Yet at the same time, many of those very same autocracies were embraced by the West as the lesser evil, against what they saw as growing extremism. This laid the groundwork for deep contradictions. And then, September 11th, 2001, these terrorist attacks weren't just a provocation for a military response. They triggered an ideological crusade. Washington launched its so-called war on terror, starting in Afghanistan, but quickly expanding into Iraq. This is where a dangerous neoconservative fantasy took hold: the belief that democracy could be exported by force. The result, as we now know, was catastrophic. The invasion of Iraq didn't just remove Saddam Hussein, it destroyed a central pillar of regional balance. In the rubble of Iraq, sectarianism flourished, and religious extremism metastasized. From this chaos, groups like Islamic State emerged, with devastating consequences that reverberated globally. And as Iraq was dismantled, a new regional power began to rise, almost unimpeded: Iran. No longer encircled by a hostile Iraq, Tehran extended its reach, to Baghdad, to Damascus, to Beirut. Suddenly, Iran was a dominant force, filling the void left by the US's destabilizing actions. Other regional players also began asserting themselves. Turkey, under Erdogan, revived its own imperial reflexes. The Gulf states, flush with oil wealth, began throwing their economic and political weight around with unprecedented confidence. In the US, the very architect of this disorder, found itself increasingly mired in endless, unwinnable wars, bleeding resources, and credibility. The unraveling continued. Consider the US-imposed Palestinian elections, which, ironically, ended up splitting the Palestinian territories and empowering Hamas, a group the West considered an adversary. Then came the Arab Spring, initially lauded in Western capitals as a glorious democratic awakening. In reality, it often hastened the collapse of already brittle states. We saw Libya shattered, descending into lawlessness. Syria plummeted into a brutal, multi-sided proxy war that continues to this day. Yemen became a humanitarian catastrophe. Even South Sudan, birthed under external pressure, quickly fell into dysfunction. All of these events marked the definitive end of any remaining regional balance. The expectation that the end of authoritarianism would usher in liberal democracy was a profound miscalculation. Instead, it often gave way to political Islam, which for a time became the only structured form of political participation available to many. This, in turn, triggered attempts by the old regimes to restore order, often seen now by many as the lesser evil compared to the chaos and extremism that had emerged. Egypt and Tunisia, for example, eventually reimposed secular order, though not without significant upheaval. But places like Libya and parts of Iraq have largely remained stateless zones. Syria's trajectory is particularly instructive. It moved from dictatorship to Islamist chaos, and now toward a patchwork autocracy held together by various foreign patrons, including Russia, whose 2015 intervention temporarily stabilized the situation. But Syria is now drifting toward becoming a non-state entity, its sovereignty unclear, its borders uncertain. Amidst this widespread collapse of Arab states, it's no coincidence that the key powers shaping today's Middle East are primarily non-Arab: Iran, Turkey, and Israel. While Arab states remain vocal, they have generally opted for caution, adapting to the new realities rather than leading the charge. These three countries represent distinct political models. Iran, an Islamic theocracy with complex pluralist features, pushing an expansionist regional agenda. Turkey, a militarized democracy under Erdogan, focused on reviving its historical influence. Israel, once seen as a Western-style democracy. It's increasingly shaped by religious nationalism and a more liberal internal political system. Despite their vast differences, these states share one critical trait: their domestic politics are inextricably linked to their foreign policy. Iran's expansionism is deeply tied to the economic and ideological reach of its revolutionary guard. Erdogan's foreign escapades often feed his domestic narrative of Turkish resurgence and national pride. And Israel's doctrine of security has fundamentally shifted from a supposedly defensive posture to one shameless intent of actively transforming the region by colonization and religious exceptionalism. This brings us to the present. The liberal order that peaked at the turn of the century, with its belief in exporting democracy through market economics, elections, and civil society, largely failed in the Middle East. Not only did it dismantle the old without effectively building something new, but the very forces meant to spread democracy often inadvertently empowered sectarianism and violence. Now, the appetite for this kind of transformative intervention has dried up in the West, and with it, the liberal order itself seems to be receding. In its place, we're seeing a convergence of systems once thought irreconcilable. Israel, for instance, no longer stands as a liberal outpost surrounded by authoritarian relics. Its political system has grown increasingly illiberal, its governance more militarized, and its nationalism more overt. The current Netanyahu government in Israel is the clearest expression of this change. While one might argue that the October 2023 Hamas attacks justified extreme measures, what is absolutely false considering what Israel has been doing since day one of its existence. These shifts in Israel's internal and external policies began much earlier. The recent war simply accelerated trends already in motion. As liberalism recedes, a new kind of utopia is taking its place. It's not democratic or inclusive. Instead, it's transactional and enforced. Leaders like Donald Trump, the Israeli right, and their Gulf allies envision a Middle East pacified not through shared values, but through military dominance, economic deals, and strategic normalization. The Abraham Accords, framed as a pathway to peace, are very much a part of this vision. But peace built solely on force, without addressing underlying grievances or fostering true reconciliation, is often no peace at all. It's a temporary suppression of conflict. So when we look at the current Israel-Iran conflict, it's crucial to understand it's not a bolt from the blue. It is the direct, tragic consequence of 2 decades of dismantled norms, unchecked ambitions, and a profound misunderstanding of the region's complex political fabric by Western powers. The fantasy of liberal reform imposed from the outside has, ironically, given us the ruins of war. The lessons are stark. Simplistic moral binaries rarely apply. Interventionism, even with noble intentions, can have devastating unintended consequences. And when utopias, whether liberal or transactional, fail in the Middle East, it is, as always, the people who pay the highest price. Understanding this history doesn't condone violence or justify any specific actor's actions. Instead, it provides a vital framework for comprehending the current crisis, moving beyond the headlines to the deeper currents of history and power that have shaped this volatile region. And don't forget, like the video and subscribe the channel to keep thinking the world how it really is.